Hey everybody, it's great to see you today. Welcome to Living Power, your online Bible study where we are walking through the Bible in a year. Today is October 13th, and this lesson is about resolving conflict. We're going to talk about resolving conflict at the end of the video today in our discussion of one of the teachings that Jesus mentions in the reading today. We're actually going to review a whole day in the life of Jesus today. We're going to talk about multiple teachings that he shares with the disciples. Yesterday, though, was the first time that he predicted his death. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem to die. That's what's happening in the reading. Yesterday, we saw his glory as it was revealed through the transfiguration to the 3 disciples that were permitted to witness that. Today, as the 12 are walking with him, they're headed to Jerusalem, but they are actually in Galilee. We read about cities like Capernaum, which is actually on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And there are many experiences, okay? So today, while Jesus and the 3 disciples are on the mountain in the transfiguration experience, which is what we read about yesterday, something is going on in the valley with the other 9. And that's where the reading picks up today. The other 9 are in a very embarrassing situation. They are trying to make a demon come out of someone, and they can't get it to work. There are tons of people all around watching this. It's a public display, and the Pharisees are just mocking them, and it's just very uncomfortable for them. Then the 3 disciples and Jesus appear. They've come down from the mountain after the transfiguration experience, and Jesus is saying, "What's going on here? What's all the commotion about?" He then takes over the situation and releases the demon and explains that the reason the disciples were unsuccessful in this is because they did not pray. They did not pray beforehand. In some earlier Greek manuscripts, it actually says it needs prayer and fasting, but in most of the translations we see that it says prayer. This just simply can remind us that when we rely on our own power to do the work of the Lord, it's just not going to work. We have to be prayed up for whatever it is we are trying to undertake, and in some cases we have to pray and fast because that will help us in our efforts. And this is why Jesus said that they had failed in that. Jesus also today talks of his death for the second time. The disciples don't understand it though. And in Mark 9:33-37, it actually shows us that Jesus has a twofold ministry at this point. And for those of you who love to study discipleship, you'll know that Jesus had a public ministry, which is where he taught to the multitudes. He would teach outside on a mountainside. He would allow people to come to him, and he would teach in the temple to the learned rabbis of the day. But Jesus also had a secondary ministry, which was a private ministry. This was where he taught the 12, or he pulled the 3 aside and showed or demonstrated something special with them. So Jesus is undergoing a twofold ministry here. In Mark 9, we read about a section called "The Greatest in the Kingdom." And the disciples are asking this question. They're probably arguing just a little bit amongst themselves. Who is the greatest? And Jesus answers that question with, of course, a God-filled answer that the disciples hadn't thought of. And his answer was that if you want to be first, you have to be least. If you want to be considered the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, you actually have to be the one most willing to serve and do the lowliest types of jobs. For this is a paradox in the kingdom of heaven, that the one who serves is actually considered greatest in the kingdom of God. The other thing there's another story in Matthew 17:24-27 about the temple tax. And I wanted to explain a couple of things about this story. When the 12 are coming back to Capernaum, there's a lot of activity that you have to kind of read between the lines in the reading today. They're on the move, they're going back to Capernaum. A tax collector is actually waiting for them outside of the house that they're entering in Capernaum. And according to the custom, every Jew 20 and older has to pay a temple tax. It was equal to a half a shekel or 2 drachmas. That was the same value. And evidently, Peter and Jesus had not paid their tax yet. So Jesus tells Peter to go fish and that he would find a coin in the fish's mouth. And the coin was actually worth 4 drachmas, which would have been the price that both of them needed to pay for the temple tax. So the point here is that yes, Jesus was king, and that a king is exempt. Probably he did not have to pay. And according to the study materials that I read, the king's family would have also been exempt from this type of tax. But the king was required to pay for his family, or to provide for his family. So actually in doing this, in providing for the coin that Peter needed to pay, Jesus was actually honoring his duty as king, even though they had no idea what was going on. They did not acknowledge him as king at this time. But Jesus, of course, did the right and proper thing. Now, there's another story about the unforgiving debtor in Matthew 18:21-35. And this is a great question. You may have heard this before, but the question is, how many times should I forgive my neighbor? If someone does me wrong over and over and over again, what's the limit here? Because you wonder if the person asking this question had someone particular in their life that was just driving them crazy, and they just couldn't find it in their heart to forgive them anymore. I wonder if they were looking and expecting for a rather simple answer. 7 times, is that enough? And if someone does me wrong 8, then that's it? But Jesus gives a very interesting and unexpected response. The point that Jesus makes in saying, you must forgive 70 times 7, is that forgiveness should be given in direct proportion to the amount that we have been forgiven. And of course, he was referring to the amount of forgiveness that is bestowed and lavished on us by the Father in heaven, which we can't possibly repay. So what he was saying was, forgive over and over and over again. And of course, he tells that wonderful parable to make his point. Now, we also see that there are some guidelines for resolving conflict in our reading today, and this is the story about correcting a fellow believer. And this text passage has actually been used and should be used in the church today to teach believers how do you resolve conflict one to another. Basically, the rules are this: if you have a conflict with someone, you're to go to that person without talking to anyone else about it and try to resolve your differences. If they are unwilling to hear you, to meet with you, to try to work with you, then you're supposed to take a witness, take someone else, but continue a second time to try to work things out with that person. So that would be amongst 3 people. If they're still not willing to hear you or work with you, then you're supposed to take it to the church, the body, the public body of the church, and then let them decide. So basically, I wonder how often this type of problem-solving method is used. Do you, when you have a conflict with someone, is it your first response to go to that person and only that person? Or do you sometimes think, well, I'm going to talk about it with my spouse, or I'm going to talk about it with my girlfriend or my friend, and avoid going to that person first? You see, when we do that, when we talk to someone else, there's actually 3 things that happen. we're actually casting doubt on the sincerity of our own motives in wanting to reconcile with that person. The second thing is we're actually tempting the listener that we're dragging in to the whole situation to sin against that person too. And we could very well be stifling the restoration process. So what this passage teaches us is that when you have a conflict with someone else, the best thing to do is to pray first. Go to the Lord before you do anything. Then second, consider the best way to lovingly confront that person. Maybe email isn't the best. Maybe the phone conversation isn't the best. Maybe you need to meet the person face to face. But consider the best way to approach them. And be sure you understand the facts about the situation. So it's certainly okay to ask questions before you confront the person, or perhaps you're dealing with an issue right now and you know that there's someone that comes to mind that you need to confront. Perhaps asking a question is the best way to proceed when you do meet with that person. So I had a discussion in my small group about this, and one of the ladies in my group said, well, I have someone at work that constantly comes to me and that drags me into complaining and the situation that she has that just doesn't seem to be able to be worked out with another person, another third party. And I have a hard time not listening and not getting dragged into it. So we together as a group shared with her and suggested with her a couple of things that you can do. I'm going to suggest to you today, if you're in that situation, somebody keeps dragging you into their problems, here's something that you could do. You could say, wow, this reminds me of Matthew 18:15 that says you are to go to the person first, and then if they're unwilling to work with you to resolve the problem, you are to take a witness. I would be happy to go with you when you can directly confront that person if you would like for me to. Just let me know. And if that person is really not sincere about wanting to resolve the conflict, that'll probably be the end of it. But if they are sincere, they may just take you up on it and you could go and assist in that conflict resolution. Just a suggestion for you today. Well, I pray that if any of you are in the midst or about to be in the midst of a situation where you need to resolve conflict, this would help you to remember to put God first, to pray before you go, cover it in prayer, and always go to the person first before discussing it with others. I pray that this lesson has been a blessing to you. Tomorrow we're going to continue in the life of Jesus. I hope you'll join me then. Shalom.